Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Roxanne or Tiger Reed, who is a woman who lived as a trans man for several years and has recently embarked upon detransition. She's also the partner or ex-partner of Jamie Reed, who is an instrumental firebrand and whistleblower about trans healthcare in the Midwest. In this conversation, Roxanne shares the childhood experiences that led her to identifying as trans and then going forward with the medicalization of that identity, and then also what caused her to disembark from that identity and to reckon with herself as a biological female. You can find links to Roxanne's social media down there in the description, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the links below. Without further ado, here is Roxanne Reed. How's it going?
It's going well. This is the second podcast I'm doing today.
Oh, wow. You're lining them up, shooting them out.
Yeah. And then we've got a call with a state representative from Michigan later, and talking to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch also. So
Okay. Whirlwind tour. It's almost like he wrote a book or something.
maybe one day. Well, maybe one day. I might start just by adding some more stuff to my Substack. We'll see if I can find the time to do that.
Yeah.
It's definitely something I'm thinking about.
You guys have a very busy life. Jet setting. How many children are you tending?
We have 5 kids.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
Well, 3 of them are 6 and under, so that's the tough part right there. The older kids are 14 and 16, so they're getting more independent and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How is that being a parent?
The wildest ride of my life. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I've known her since I was 25, and I was like, if you would have told me when I was 25 that I would have this many kids, or that I would be a parent, or that I would even enjoy it, I would have told you were crazy, And what's interesting now is like my whole world revolves around them, and I'm okay with that. It's a nice surprise.
Yeah. Is that a microphone on the back of your headset?
No, there should be. That's the.
Oh, okay. It's a strap. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's the hat. It's a dad hat.
Could we just try just to see if there's slightly clearer audio? If you go to Zoom, and I don't know what kind of computer you're on.
I'm on a Mac Mini.
Okay, then it won't have an alternative microphone, so that's fine.
I do. Well, my camera does. So I have a. Is that a little bit clearer for you?
Could you speak?
Is that clearer for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I would need you to just do the ABCs so I could figure out what it's doing.
Okay, A, B, C, D, E, F.
Yeah, I guess the headphones are slightly better.
Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, no, not a problem. I'll be right back. I'm just going to turn down the heat. Listen, get really hot. What? I don't want to dead name you or mid name you.
You can do any of the above.
What feels right to you right now?
So, I mean, I thought I was going to be weird about Roxanne, but I'm not at all. And I'm okay with Tiger still. My kids call me Tiger. Jamie's still calling me Tiger. But half the people I work with are calling me Roxy or Roxanne. Most of my older friends are calling me Roxanne. So it's really not,
Yeah. How does your story begin?
Oh, man. I don't, I was really a gender nonconforming kid. And I was super tomboy, super athletic growing up, just naturally I gravitated towards boys' toys, GI Joes, Transformers, that kind of thing. Really competitive. So I love playing sports. I didn't want to play with dolls really. I had a lot of stuffed animals and things like that, but I was not like super into like the uber girly stuff. And I really paid the price for that growing up.
Oh yeah.
I was called a boy as long as I can remember.
Was that like an insult to you, or?
It was growing up early 80s in Miami. It was definitely the playground insult.
Okay.
Oh, you think you're a boy. You're a boy. What are you, a boy? Are you a boy or girl? It was always me, having to run better, faster, throw the bigger insult out, fight the boy who was talking to me that way. So I was really kind of a rough and tumble kid that way.
Yeah.
It just followed me throughout the rest of my growing up. So as I became older, once puberty started, I was miserable, like many people. My hair changed texture. I suddenly had kinky curly hair. At my period, and they were awful. I mean, right away I had, like very difficult periods. So a lot of cramping, throwing up. Later, when I was like 17, I was diagnosed with endometriosis.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I know a lot of gender non-conforming girls probably do have some sort of testosterone dysregulation, or just like different than the average.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I just know that my period pain was far worse than it should have been. And I, by the age of 16, I had been through more things than I would ever want anyone to go through ever. And so I'm a survivor of a lot of sexual abuse and trauma, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and starting from the age of 2 to probably, I was raped at a party when I was 16. And so some of the abuse was, from family members. Some was from, people outside of my home. And, that has carried me through my whole life, and sort of changed the trajectory. But now, like where I'm at now is like, kind of like, recognizing, I'm 44 now. So recognizing like, hey, like, this isn't my fault. This has a lot to do with my transition, more than I was able to comprehend before. And I knew that they were connected, but I wasn't sure how, kind of thing. And I'm still not, it's not as simple as like one equals the other to me. It's just more of like, I think for me, it ended up being like a total suppression of anything that was visibly female or feminine.
Yeah. There's this, in the gender discourse, there's one kind of trope or just recurring theme that people talk about. If I grew up in the 80s, well, somebody older saying, if I grew up today, I would have been transed. But you transitioned anyway. We have this Halicon thing. Like, back in the 80s, it was free to be you and me. That was the reigning modality. I don't remember that. I don't think anybody remembers that, but that's what we want to say that is our ideal, to counteract like the transing of children. So I understand it as kind of an argumentative form, but it doesn't seem to align with your experience.
I mean, I have strong feelings about not medicalizing gender nonconforming kids and any child in general. Like, I just don't think that we should be putting them on blockers or hormones, period. And that is strictly from being an adult transitioning. So if I was 31 and had the experience I had, which was, it was life altering. I mean, it was like a total 180 when I started taking hormones. I can't imagine being 12 years old. And where I was at when I was 12 was far less of a stable, secure place. And, the 80, you said free to be you and me. I'm like, I had that on vinyl and I had the book and everything as a kid. So it's one of my favorites, actually. But yeah, I mean, it was not growing up in the 80s was very different. Nobody ever talked about being gay. getting called a faggot in middle school was like the worst insult you could give someone. Like it was not talked about. Being trans was not talked about. Like those things were not possibilities for anyone. And so, I didn't start thinking about that until probably the early 2000s. And up until that point, I was very much identifying as a butch lesbian and, really all about being a feminist and, all of those things. Had short hair, shaved head, running around Miami with Doc Martens on. I was a line cook. So a lot of that misgendering and othering happened, when I was at work. I was in like cook's uniform. I'd go in the female restroom and somebody would come out and complain to the manager, like, hey, there's a guy in the girls' restroom. You need to get them out. The manager would come in and be like, oh, it's Roxy. Okay. And I was always like, it was always like super uncomfortable and embarrassing. There were times when I wasn't like, I tried to get on a public bus and like the bus driver wouldn't let me on because I looked so like crazy to them or whatever. Like just all kinds of conversations and things.
Did you live a life of crime and daring?
Somewhat. I mean, I was definitely a young rascal, that's for sure. I really crashed and burned early. So I dropped out of high school twice. Now I have 2 graduate degrees, so I'm highly successful in that respect. But I dropped out. I ran away from home 3 weeks before my freshman year, lived on the streets for about 3 months, had horrendous experiences, did too many drugs, and was basically like crash and burn. I was like, well, I'm in an abusive household at home, but it's still a roof over my head and a place to be. And I know how to, like, at that point I could avoid like what was the abusive parts of my home enough to like, I could get a ride out of there, or I could call somebody to pick me up or something. And what happened was I ended up dropping out a second time because I just couldn't sit still in the classroom. And I was in such a large high school. I think there were like 4,000 kids in my high school. And I just easily fell through the cracks. And so what happened was I got a job and then I went back to school when I was like 23. So it was like my thing then.
Yeah. This is I guess the 90s then.
Yeah. Late 90s, year 2000. So I was 23 when I went back to school. But it was a really, challenging time for me, but I always made sure I was like reading books and doing things like that. And then went, back to community college and I started studying art there. I found an incredible professor who I'm still friends with today, who really like believed in me and like saw that I was willing to work and really helped me get my portfolio together. And I ended up, getting accepted to all the art schools I applied to and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm.
Well, I brought up the 90s because there wasn't kind of what people in their 20s now are navigating all these different identity groups and stuff. So did you have like a group or an identity that you were a part of that you plugged into other people through?
Miami's so interesting. There's so many different kinds of people there. And it's really, I'm so grateful I grew up there because you could do whatever you wanted. If I wanted to go to a punk show on Saturday, I went to a punk show. But then that Sunday, I'd be going to the Rainbow Gathering Circle for hippies, in the park with bare feet. And so, like, I knew a lot of people and I hung out a lot in the punk rock scene. I definitely, in my early 20s, had a lot of gay friends. But what I was going to say about crashing and burning is I basically had to get clean. So I stopped doing drugs when I was like 16 and I was in 12-step programs from 16 to 24. So for about 8 years there. And the women that I met there, I met a lot of lesbian women in recovery that took me under their wing and really did all they could to take care of me. And really, I was so lucky to have that support growing up. So like they were teaching me how to be an adult, how to pay rent, how to be a good friend, like all these things that I wasn't getting because I wasn't living at home anymore. They provided that for me. And so that's, I was a part of that community for a long time of just this lesbian community that we really just like, was so supportive.
Yeah, like a sisterhood of sorts.
Oh, for sure. I'm still friends with all those people now,
Yeah. You're still in the same area then, I suppose.
No, so I
No,
live
I'm
in St.
sorry. No.
Louis now.
Yeah, you guys are far away. Yeah. Okay. Duh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still like connected on Facebook to a lot of these people, and that's been really nice to kind of be able to see people as they've like moved and changed and had kids and grandkids and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess I'm an old fogey on Facebook, in
Oh,
some
good.
respects.
Yeah, we're all a little bit of a boomer somehow. What happened at 16 that spurred you to go clean?
I took a hit of acid that lasted me a week.
Yeah.
And I went home. I was in on a trip with friends to the Keys. It was around my birthday, and they dropped me off back home. I was like full of beach sand and crazy, and I went into my room and I tried to come down and I couldn't. And so I told my grandfather who was raising me and his girlfriend, like, I need to go to the hospital. You got to take me somewhere. And at that point, I just knew I needed some help. And so they got me in a hospital. I stayed for about a week, and it took me a really long time to kind of get over that. I've never done any kind of drugs like that again.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to. I think I've smoked marijuana like maybe 2 or 3 times in my whole life after that. It was, I had panic attacks for 18 months after that. It was really not advisable.
Yeah. Well, was there something that you were being shown about yourself through that, or was it just a bad trip? Was it just a bad trip?
The drugs were just shitty for my body.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I was in bad situations, hanging out with a bunch of older people, and just couldn't handle the chemicals in my body. It really is kind of how I think of it now. And I'm so glad that it was that scary, to stop. Because I don't think I would have been able to get my life back otherwise.
What was it about 12-step that was helpful for you, aside from the community that you found there?
It was a place to be. It was a place to be that I didn't have to pay money. You could stay if you wanted. You didn't have to stay for the message or anything like that. But I made a lot of friends there, and people that were like not doing negative things to their body or to other people, or for the most part, trying to live a good life, and there was a lot of camaraderie and fellowship, like we would go out to eat restaurant. I mean, I think I ate at every restaurant in Miami for almost 10 years, So it was really a good community for me to be a part of, because then once I was ready to go back to school, like I was already set up and mature enough to do that, because I had been like taking responsibility for my life for 8 years before that,
What was your 20s like then after college? You just did art?
Well, so I went, I actually finished my 20s in school. So I got a undergraduate fine arts degree from Corcoran College of Art in DC. So I lived there for 2 years with my ex, Natalie, who's like my best friend now. And then I got into graduate school at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, for printmaking. So I immediately, because 2008 happened and I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to get a job. And what am I going to do? And so I made sure I got into graduate school somehow. And got into grad school, traveled across the country. I lived across the street from a cornfield. I think I cried for 2 weeks. The first 2 months I was in the Midwest, I was like, where am I?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it was a 3-year program. And then that's where a lot happened in those 3 years. So the first year, my grandfather passed away over the winter break. Cirrhosis of the liver. He was an alcoholic. It was expected. And then I went down over the winter break and just packed his whole house up. So that was a big growing up experience for me. So I was like turning 30 that year. And then right before my last semester there, so it was a 3-year program, I was supposed to have an art show. I had like my first gallery show in St. Louis. That wasn't even my NFA show, scheduled for the next day. And his girlfriend, the woman that raised me, passed away suddenly in her sleep. And I had to basically take a red eye down to Miami and deal with that. And it was the most devastating thing that's ever happened to me as an adult. She was more my mother than my biological mother. We talked every day on the phone. Like there was not a decision I didn't run by this person. She was amazing. And she was really a huge positive influence to me growing up. And so I came back to school a broken person. A month into the semester, I had more artwork that, I was like super prolific. So like, I didn't have a problem like getting work for my graduate show, but I found a therapist in their health and wellness center. I didn't even have insurance. And that's, once we worked through a lot of the grief and that shock of Sam being not with us anymore. I mean, I was going there twice a week because I was just falling apart. And once conversations started happening, I started opening up to this person about how I felt about my gender, my sexuality, and, my feelings about being trans. And she, to this day, like, I owe her a lot. I mean, she was an incredible therapist, very smart, was able to get through to me in ways. The only thing she never did was offer me an alternative. And I think part of that was she wanted to be affirmative and as inclusive as possible. I think she was operating under, whatever her procedural things she was supposed to be doing. But she wrote my first letter, to get testosterone, which I started that spring. But in my mind at the time, everybody who I cared about, if I was going to transition, was gone. I had no immediate family that I was, my mom was still alive, but I wasn't speaking to her. My uncle was still alive. I wasn't speaking to him. And it was just, I felt alone, and I was like, well, I'm going to do this now because I can, and there's nobody to say anything to me.
But you had that idea before that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
When did that first come into your head?
I mean, when I was a kid, I was always like, why wasn't I born a boy? Why don't I have a penis? That kind of stuff. But looking back now, I'm like, I just liked what I liked, And then I think, in my early 20s, we watched Transgeneration. And I remember watching that and relating to it. And then when Boys Don't Cry came out, the movie with Hilary Swank, I went and saw that in the theater by myself and cried the whole movie. I mean, I was like, could not believe what I was watching because I had never heard the story before. And at that time, that story represented like, if you're this kind of person, if you look like this, you're going to get killed, and so it was scary for me. It was really a traumatic sort of thing to watch on the screen because I related so strongly to how Hilary Swank like portrayed Brandon Tina, and I mean, I didn't think about it for another 10 years because of that. I was so scared. And it just always was kind of brewing in the back of my mind. And then I finally, was ready to talk about it and was like, yeah, this is what I'm doing,
So you were, I guess you said when you were in your teens and 20s, you were a butch lesbian. So you didn't have any problem with your sexuality.
No. That was secondary to everything else. I was fine being gay, I was really like some of it was like, I'll never forget. I went to graduate school with a woman who was married to her partner and had known her partner since high school. Everything was hunky dory, but they were low key gay, so they were like, all their friends were straight. They acted, like they were all like, they looked feminine. They were not butcher, like they didn't have any of those gender differences. And I finally told this person one day, I was like, she was like, oh, you're too gay for us or whatever. And I was like, I'm the one on the front lines fighting for your rights because I'm the visible person here. Who are you? And I was like, I'm tired of being that person for people like you, And I never forget telling that person that I was trans. She was like, oh, that's great. You could move to like a new city and totally reinvent yourself. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so like, it was, I don't know, like being gay was never a problem for me. It was more of like people's responses to my presence, because I looked so masculine and because I either had a shaved head or I dressed, like to my graduation for graduate school, I wore like a tie
you're too old to be, I don't know. Was part of what facilitated your desire to transition a desire to smooth out the tensions between how society saw you and how you saw yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a struggle my whole life. There was a lot of anguish associated with how I was treated by women I dated. There were lots of women, early on in Miami where like, they were like, well, if you're a guy, I'd totally stay with you. Or like, I wish you were a guy because I would like you then. You know, and also like the dichotomy or like the duality of like appearing very butch, but in reality being very femme, internally and like logistically, with other women. Like I wanted to be with all the butch girls, and they didn't want anything to do with me because I looked just like them. It's very stereotypical role, in Miami back then. And it's not until like even now where I'm like realizing like the transition and being butch for me was comfortable, but then also like a way to suppress anything that appeared female that could be exploited by men.
Okay.
And that's taken me a long, long time to reconcile and admit and be okay with.
Yeah. It's interesting because, we know the typology by Blanchard about the male transitioners. There's the homosexual transsexuals who are just so effeminate that it makes sense that they just kind of go the next step because they fit into society easier. And then there's the autogonophiles, if you subscribe to that or not, where the man wants to appropriate the female identity because he's in a relationship internally with that.
Right.
And I don't know if there's a typology as strict with females. I mean, female sexuality tends to be more fluid, more difficult to track, not as categorical, not as burnt, wired in as male sexuality. But when you transition, it's not like you're trying to appropriate the patriarchy. You're just trying to like make yourself neutral to the patriarchy, if I may use those terms.
For sure. It was very much, I made myself as invisible as possible, like a part of the crowd, and that presented its own problems, along the way.
Like what?
The first couple of years I was transitioning, it was kind of exploding in St. Louis. There's a vibrant queer community here. There's a big trans community. I had never seen a trans person before I moved to the Midwest. Like a female to male. I'd met like trans women in Miami, but Miami's huge, like you can, it's less grassroots. It's less independently organized. I found support groups right away here in St. Louis, was able to interact with trans guys. And there were all different kinds of guys, all different kinds of people. But so it was exciting when I first was transitioning to hear guys that were on hormones and I wasn't yet on hormones and like that kind of stuff. And then when I met Jamie, I was a couple years into my transition. And, by the time we got married, like we were being read everywhere in public as a straight couple.
Yeah.
I mean, I passed pretty easily, like probably a year and a half into my transition. And so like the safety was there because like, I'm not a threat if I'm not an ambiguous person. I found that in my life, when I've been occupied in an ambiguous space where people can't tell if I'm male or female, that's when I'm in the most danger. People feel most threatened by that. Whereas if they can look at you and clock you and say, oh, that's a guy, or that's a girl, or that's a trans guy, like once people are able to kind of figure out or make the assumption, then everything else is a little bit easier. So it was hard for us because we didn't identify as straight at all. And I never have, and I never will.
Yeah. But is it a problem to be identified as straight?
It wasn't for a while, I mean, we were enjoying our marriage and our relationship and that kind of stuff and really focused on our kids and things like that. Me learning how to be a parent with my two older stepchildren took some time. They were a little bit older. And then when we made the choice to be foster parents and stuff, like that just takes up all of your attention, Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it presented some problems and then some benefit too,
What did you learn about being a man by putting on the man costume?
Nothing.
Nothing? No, you don't have any special insights for us guys in the room?
I don't, because I think like a woman and I always have. And so like, there's no, like, I don't know what it is to be a man because I'm not a man. And I figured that out pretty quickly. I got let into this club that I didn't know existed. So lots of these straight guys that I work with would be like, blah, 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 like, or like, kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink about like being a guy. And I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I know how to play the part and I know the things to say, but it doesn't make it comfortable for me. Like it's not a space that I enjoy occupying.
Yeah.
When I worked in kitchens, so I was a line cook for many years, those are toxic environments where I learned to talk just like a sailor, like everyone else, and be as misogynistic as they can be there, because that's how you kind of fend for yourself in those spaces. So as a woman, that was a difficult place to be in. So I was young, gay, and a line cook, and never getting promoted, never getting paid the same amount as these other guys, never being put on a different station when I could cook circles around people, and getting sexually harassed every single day I went to work. They're groping me, grabbing me, talking to me about being gay and how I need their penis or whatever. And so I had to have these quick comebacks,
Yeah.
And so that didn't feel good either, because then I'm just becoming the oppressor also in that situation. And then when I became as I transitioned and became read as male, like it was very different. Like, friends that I was meeting that were female treated me differently, and I didn't know how to respond to that. Like it wasn't a close type of friendship like I was used to as a woman. So like I didn't get invited to go out to like coffee with my girlfriends. Like it was like a very arm's length, thing, and it was like totally weird to me, to be viewed as a potential threat. So that was interesting.
It's really difficult. It's enlightening, but like there's a cost that you've had to pay for being, I guess we'll just use the term gender nonconforming. You're like in this marginal space and you bring up a lot of discomfort. You bring out a lot of ambivalence or ambiguity, and people, you erode certain assumptions about society. And so you're on the outside of it and you're being treated in all these different ways. And, one route to solve that situation would be to make society more accepting of the marginal. But I don't know if you can actually do that. And so I think that transition, because that's how society just functions. I think transition is a crude way to solve that problem. Like in extreme case, Iran, if you're gay, a male, you either get thrown off of a roof or you transition. Like that's just how they solve that. And our society is much more liberal and relaxed around that. But those patterns of human discourse and connectivity are still there. What do you think about that? I'm sure like you probably have gone through a radical phase and probably a less radical phase. Where do you stand about, like, if you're talking to yourself at 16, like, okay, you're going to navigate, how do you navigate this? Here's some pro tips. Or if you want to change society so that 16-year-old doesn't have to go through what you go through, like,
so something like what Jamie has done, to start the LGBT Courage Coalition and really champion gender nonconforming kids, and especially gay kids and lesbian kids, like that's the kind of stuff. I wish I had that growing up. I wish I had more positive experiences. I did, a bit in with my lesbian friends or whatever, but they were just as marginalized and just as in the those difficult spaces. I mean, there's a lot of machismo Cuban culture in Miami, and a lot of that played into different scenes and things like that down there. But really, like, I would just tell my 16-year-old self, like, just keep going to school, like, don't drop out. Like, we're okay. Everything's going to be okay. Like, just be yourself. Like, but really the person I would want to talk to is my 23-year-old self and my 30-year-old self, like, hey, like, this person passed away and it's okay to still be you. This person passed away. You didn't lose everything. This person passed away and you have a deep-rooted trauma of abandonment and fear of intimacy. like those things are okay to have to work on. Like, I wish I could go back and reassure myself, and I don't regret it because I'm where I'm at today and I know who I am, and that's an amazing gift. I just through going public, I've done so much writing and work and just kind of things have connected for me in ways that are so surprising. So I have I don't feel like a victim in any sense of the word. I feel more of like, I'm like kind of reclaiming, myself and who I am and owning who I was, and owning that history and being okay with it,
What was transition then? Was it a great project that you got to embark on and take up working on other parts of yourself? Maybe you're like
I would say what a long, strange trip it's been. Like I'm a huge Dead fan, so but really it's like the most bizarre thing I could have ever gone through. I don't know, like I've always tried to describe it to people, and I'm just like, it's bizarre to socially transition and to have people address you by a completely different name, change your pronouns, and really like even when I was first transitioning, I was a little more upfront, like, hey, use he now. But I was really fortunate. I had a smooth transition. People were super respectful. At SIUE, I hadn't even started taking hormones. I had my first printmaking class. All of those students called me he, and called me by Tiger. Nobody ever disrespected me. It was amazing. I mean, but it was bizarre. Like I didn't have that expectation of like, oh my God, they're not using my pronouns. This is terrible. Like, who cares? Like the person I was with at the time, like we would go out to eat dinner and the server would be like, hey girls, how you doing? And she would get so mad. And I'm like, yeah, but I still look like a girl. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a girl still, and now in detransition, people are like, what do you want to be called? And I'm like, it really doesn't matter to me. Because the road back to appearing female is going to be is much more different than the transition. So that's going to involve a couple of things that I have to figure out how I'm going to pay for, like, facial hair removal. I would like to have a hair transplant to be able to grow my hair a little bit longer. I may have chest reconstructive surgery. I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent about that. I don't want to have major surgery if I don't have to again. And then seeing like what the effects of being off of testosterone really are going to look like in the next 2 years. I'm curious. I don't know.
Yeah. When I just went through a major transformation in my life over the past couple of years, like I was in one life and then I ended up in another life. I got married to this person and it was just like this big switcheroo. And I remember last summer specifically, I was really disoriented. I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, where am I? Who am I? So was there a disorientation in like moving into a new self like that for transition when you entered into transition, where you'd wake up in the middle of life, like I'm part this, part there, anything like that?
I mean, before top surgery, there was a lot of uncomfortability because I was binding. And I had like the first change that happened to me was, beside my voice changing, was like, I just got hair everywhere. My family is hairy. I clearly am hairy with them. Yeah. And so beast like mode. Having, it's like a hair sweater. We always joke around about that. And so like having breasts and having that on my chest was really, I hated it. Like hated that. And I did. And what's crazy is like, I always in the beginning was like, I never hated my body. I always told people that. And I didn't, cause it was my body, and I was telling, Jack Jewell earlier, like, I was attractive. I felt attractive. I had, like my chest looked great. My body, I was mostly confident about my body, that kind of stuff. But the transition, like that dogma of like top surgery, you're going to feel better. There was no space for a hairy chested woman, like there still isn't,
outside of some sort of Saskatchewan pinup calendar. No, Saskatchewan, Sasquatch. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Canada. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, that is something that like I was more frustrated about in the beginning was like, I I would love to keep all my body parts, but like for practicality's sake and safety's sake, like I just don't think I can, and so that was like I'm very pragmatic. So it's like, that was my line of thinking, is like, okay, like these got to go, because I got to be able to breathe again. I got to, like, I can't not bind. So, when I go to work, I don't want anybody to, and I talk to, there's always like this running dialogue in my mind, or assessment in my mind, when I go somewhere new. Like, do they know I'm trans? If they know I'm trans, do they take me seriously as a person? Are they a threat to my safety? What are they thinking about me? And I worked like as a children's youth specialist for about 5 years. I did story times all over St. Louis. I was became a manager of the youth services department there. What a wonderful job. It totally prepped me for being a parent, for sure. But, those were pre-tops. I mean, I had top surgery like right in the middle of when I was working in that department. And, my colleagues were so wonderful, and they still are. So many people I work with have been like really great since I've gone public with my detransition. But that was hard, because I'd be binding and like jumping up and down in story time, and like I couldn't breathe, and things like that. And it just became a practical concern at that point. I was like, we had the insurance that would cover the cost. I mean, I had a breast surgeon and a plastic surgeon do my top surgery, and it came out fantastic. I mean, I still have my sensation. There's some numbness on the sides, but like my scarring is very good. I did have complications. I had some internal bleeding on the surgery, and they had to take me right back in. So that was pretty terrible. I did grieve losing my breasts. That is a real thing. I still miss them. I don't hate my chest.
I'm a fan of breasts. I don't like the war on tits.
Me too. I and that may be, I may reclaim them eventually. Seeing, depending on where I'm at and how I feel,
how did psychologically, how did the mastectomy, the double mastectomy affect you? Like, was it kind of traumatic? I mean, your body's probably traumatized, right? Yes.
So Jamie was really helpful, like with like, taking care of me that first week. But it was weird. I could see my stomach. That was like the weirdest thing. Like the whole, like the way you look down and your point of view, women are used to seeing their breasts first, and then maybe their stomach if you got a little pooch or whatever. But like, it was so bizarre. I was like, what is happening? But also like it was liberating at the time, because I didn't have to bind anymore. Then I had a chest where the hair didn't look out of place. I could wear t-shirts and not worry about like, how my breasts fit inside the shirt, or like my button down shirts that I like to wear to work, like they look correct, and so, and I also was like,
was it worth the sacrifice?
Oh no.
No. How did you convince yourself that it was worth it then?
They're gone. What are you going to do?
Okay.
You just got to move on with your day, you got to, I mean, at the time, the first 2 years or so, I was pretty happy with it. I thought I was a satisfied customer. And then like, as time has gone on, it's just kind of become lackluster, and just kind of like, okay, it is what it is, but I also like have muscles like a guy, and like, like that kind of, without even working out, or like that kind of thing. And so it's like my body has masculinized to a point where like, I don't know what it's going to look like to have that muscle weight loss, and what that's going to look like, or when I have more of a figure 8 shape again, or that kind of stuff. I'm looking forward to it. It's weird, because I never thought I was going to take hormones forever. That was never my plan. And I always I used to try to share about this in some of these support groups, that like, I don't feel male or female, but I don't feel genderqueer. Like I feel like I'm something else, almost. You're like
genderqueer, genderqueer.
I don't know, but it was so difficult to explain at the time, because I was like, I was just like, I don't want to be, I'm not a man. Like, and so like, these are the things where I was struggling to have the language of like, I'm biologically female, I mean, I just became okay with that like 4 months ago. That's radical. That's a radical change for me.
Well, how did you deal with the cognitive dissonance then, if you didn't recognize that about yourself, or just gonna have to work around it?
I was like, I'm a trans guy. I'm a trans guy. That's what I am. Like, so that became my new normal, is like, I'm a trans guy. That's it. Because I'm not a straight guy. I'm not a gay guy. I'm not a pansexual guy. Like, I'm just a trans guy. So that was the norm for me. And a lot of this, I did want to talk a little bit. I don't know how much more time we have. And so when Jamie went public from the pediatric transgender center here in St. Louis, that was wild. Like, to be married to the person that did that. As
she got written up in the New York Times. She got a lot of heat on her and a lot of light on her.
Yes. And so the craziness at home was, I was very much about being inclusive. I was very much a part of the trans community. I very much supported trans rights. Very liberal, super, super left. Although, to be fair, I'm probably more moderate than left. We always like joke that like I'm a centrist or whatever, but like I considered myself to be super liberal. And so when she started having issues at the clinic, like I was there because it was COVID, like they were working from home. I could hear everything. Not detailed information about patients or their names or any of that kind of stuff, but like what they're like, how they were managed by these doctors, how those conversations went. They were texting 24/7 in these large text groups that I always thought were inappropriate, because I'm like, you're not at work. When Jamie started having issues, she was talking to her colleague about like what they disagreed about and how they were going to go about, bringing it to the doctor's attention, and knowing that those doctors didn't care. And they were going to continue to do what they wanted to do. I always agreed that I never felt like kids should be put on hormones or have surgery, just because of my own personal experience transitioning as an adult. But like, it was hard for her. She was able to get another job. They basically like forced her out of the clinic by when she was just like putting up too much of a fight and like having too many issues. They were like, they finally let her like apply for another position, and she got it. And so I thought everything was going to be fine. Most people just quit, and they quit. And then it really wore on her conscience. And she is a very ethical, black and white kind of person, and so it was a struggle, and she started opening her mind up, and like she read some material from the gender critical side, which I had no idea about at that point. Like I didn't even know there was like gender critical anything, I just knew that there was conservative people who don't want me to exist. That was what I thought. That was in my conscious line of thinking, was like, if you're not for trans people, you're against them. So I think that's the prevailing attitude. And I knew that as I was transitioning. I remember there's a local trans group here in St. Louis. And I remember when that trans group was first being started, and I remember talking to Jamie and saying like, man, I could be a really big part of this, but there's something about this that just turns me. I just don't want to have anything to do with them, because there's no dissent. There's no other opinion, like, it just was, I remember going to like a conference, and I was like in a conference, and it was about like insurance and trans issues, but like the person presenting had no idea what they were talking about and didn't have the right credentials. And I was like, this is bullshit. So I just like took a big step back politically from that scene, because there was just something that didn't feel right. And I didn't want to become involved. So I was just like, I'm done,
Okay.
I'll just go be a library staff and help people that way, But so when she was walking away from that position, she started working, meeting people, talking to people that were gender critical. And then they started making plans for her to go public and to go to the AG in Missouri and that sort of thing. And I was like very arm's length, would not interact with those ideas. I would not speak to her about it. I didn't want to hear about it. I didn't want her to lose her job. I was really afraid for our family and like our financial security. And
but was there something about what she was doing that was kind of threatening your identity?
100%, 150%. Yes. Completely. I was not able to recognize that at the time. I was in such denial, like like nothing I've ever been in my life. Because we're at a point now where like we're actually separated. We're no longer a couple at this point. And that's just the reality of a very long 2 years for us,
Yeah.
where I think we've both grown immensely as people. I'm so proud of her today as a person. I'm so glad that she's in my life, and I'm glad that I get to be her co-parent. Like, and we've been having problems in our marriage for a long time that have nothing to do with any of this. But this kind of blew up and magnified those issues more. And we realized like we just work better as friends, when you take that pressure of the relationship off, we tend to get along very well. When we're parenting our kids and hanging out with our kids, we get along very well. We are both of one and the same mind of how to raise our children. And we both like care a lot about helping people. And, so like, even though we're separated, like, we're going to be enmeshed in each other's lives no matter what, because we have 5 kids. Like, and we've gone through, with her older children, we went through a custody battle. And so like, we're doing everything we can to keep it as friendly as possible. And also like, I think we're going to work together to help detransitioners. Like, so there's a place for me in that, a role for me in that type of advocacy and work through Jamie that I'm really excited to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Pardon me for making this observation, but if the timing of your transition was right after a major loss.
Yeah, I hear you.
And now you're detransitioning and there's separation. So there's another like breakdown in connection.
Well, it's
even if it's just romantic. Yeah, there's something
sure.
There's some sort of beat in the story of your life about loss that's just
for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say this, regardless of any of that stuff, like I'm a pretty big, again, practical optimist. So I like to many people will be like, oh, you're detransitioning because Jamie brainwashed you, or you wanted to hold on to the marriage. And some of that is true, of course. I would be a liar to say otherwise. But at the end of the day, I'm having physical health issues from taking testosterone, period.
Yeah.
Like, that's a whole separate thing. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there's loss, but I don't actually feel like I'm losing anything except that romantic relationship. Mm-hmm. So I want to be clear about that. Like,
yeah, well, I know it's just when we're talking about your story, like there's this rhyming, there's something that's part of what you are being spiritually called to grow through life.
Yeah. And I have no problem admitting that, but I do want to say, like, I would much rather have a fulfilling and deep friendship and familial connection with this person than to be miserable in a relationship with them.
Absolutely.
And we respect each other so much in that way, and I am fortunate for that. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. Like, it is a loss, and I will grieve that relationship, and it'll take some time, but at the end of the day, like, the physical side effects, like, and number one for me, it's so funny because this is also part of that rhythm, right? I transitioned a lot because of my emotional life. So I felt out of control because I cried all the time for everything. I was always upset. I hormonally was probably off the charts. Like, I don't know, because I wasn't getting that type of gynecological help with my periods and things like that. And I just wanted to not be so emotional all the time, but I didn't want them to turn off. So what happened was I get on T, a year and a half, fairly quickly, I couldn't cry. I have cried maybe 3 or 4 times in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. You get angry? How do you process them? Yeah.
Rage, anger, rage, irritability, snarky remarks, shitty tone of voice with people, slamming doors. Yeah.
Dysregulated man, but still a male.
Yeah, totally dysregulated. And peeling my tires out, throwing things, breaking shit, a lot of yelling. And the weird thing about it is, like, that anger will come and then it's gone. And then I'm not angry anymore. It's totally gone. When I was angry as with my estrogen, I could be angry with you for 2 weeks, like that anger simmers, like,
I know that.
and this is very different. So that maybe, if that's the way men are, then that's definitely how I am. But I became so numb to everything. Like it was like this complete dissociation. Like I remember like getting in an argument, early in our relationship with Jamie and watching her cry and being that level of upset, but not being able to show that I was that upset. And that caused such a disconnect in our relationship because she always thought he doesn't feel anything. And I had to be like, if I wanted her to know I was upset, I had to be like, I feel like crying right now. I'm so upset. But that doesn't do,
wow.
So those are things that like were really, I could keep it together at work or like, keep my composure much easier. But at the end of the day, like I was, I became somebody I didn't like at home. I really, fell into these tropes that, man, I don't want to be that person. I want to be, I consider myself to be a good person. And I want to be a better person. And that has to start with like treating myself well. So, I've started going to therapy. I'm taking an anti-anxiety medication now that's really totally improved my quality of my life right now. Cause I had unresolved anxiety that I was unwilling to acknowledge and a lot of that through transition and I don't like being in social situations where there's a lot of people, like stuff like that, and those things really pushed my person away from me, like those behaviors and her side of the street's not amazing either, but that's how marriages are. Right. But I have been asking my endocrinologist for like 3 years, like, when can I stop taking this? How do I stop taking this and be okay and not get a period? Like, when can I stop this? And they were just like, you should just have a hysterectomy and then you'll just take less testosterone. And I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't do that either. Cause
what's the rationale for not doing that?
I don't want another invasive surgery.
Okay.
If I don't have to have surgery, like, I'm just kind of like, I don't want to have surgery unless I absolutely have to. That's a long recovery. And then I have to be on hormones the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
How long have you not had your testosterone?
I'm still on it, actually.
Okay, so you're still...
I'm on a much lower dose right now. So I have an auto injector pen because I don't like needles. So the lowest it goes is about 50 milligrams. So I was at like 75 milligrams once a week. And
so you're going like, you're spiking up to an 18-year-old boy and then you're kind of going back down to a 56-year-old kind of man with your hormone levels?
Yeah. So I went from 75 weekly to 50 weekly for a month. Now I'm on 50 every other week. And so this is like the first week that I skipped last Wednesday. And so it's been a little difficult. And I'm also on birth control right now so that my period doesn't come back.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So my endocrinologist was like, you should start this now so that your body adjusts to having that hormone. And then she's like, you need to watch your blood pressure and things like that. I'm already on blood pressure medication. So I think I'm okay.
Wow.
But what's been crazy about it is I have cried so much since I started the birth control. I thought the testosterone would easily overpower it. And that's just not true. So I've had a couple of weekends where I've just like had a breakdown and cried about life in general. And like, just been on like really cleansing, sobbing, bawling cries. And as embarrassing as that has been, what a relief. What a relief to be able to feel my feelings for real, and have it not be manifesting as anger or rage or, inappropriate behavior. I can't explain it. I mean, I'm much more rational. I'm much more easy to deal with now. And so I'm looking forward to like seeing what happens and how I can, what will my body do? How will I feel? I'm about 6 years off of menopause age already. So really I won't have to take the birth control for too long.
And then there's the hot flashes to deal with. So,
but I'll be the right age,
yeah.
and people, that'll be expected. And so like I'm hopeful with that. I'm obviously like taking it as it comes and seeing how I feel, but I, I've said this on Twitter, and I'll say it to you now, like your podcast with Ben Ryan, where he talked about, trans people taking cross-sex hormones and not identifying as their biological sex, being like, doesn't make sense to him. It took me listening to him saying that for me to the light bulb to go off and say, oh my God, why have because I mean, I was like fighting with Jamie like 3 months before that going, how could you call me a biological female? How dare you?
Okay. Really? Okay. Yeah.
Really.
Let's lay that out then. So to what degree did you need to build your identity around this? Because you're going to your groups, and the rainbow groups, they really have all these labels. Everybody needs a label. You got to have a label. And you're like, well, I don't even have a label, but I know I'm not, I'm a trans man. I'm a trans man. So you built your identity around this trans man thing. And then Jamie starts throwing you information that are probably sounding an alarm in you. It's like, wait, they're doing this to children. They're doing this to children. And you're like, well, I was an adult. So I'm sure you probably had to navigate some cognitive dissonance. He's like, wait, this is not natural. This is not natural. This is a medical experiment. And then you're like, wait, I'm doing, so what was the process of?
Well, I immediately was immediately defensive, and was defensive for about a year. And just being like, you don't like trans people, you hate trans people, you hate me.
Wow.
And that's not true. And I know that now, and I'm ashamed to admit that I said those things to her and I was unsupportive, because I feel like if I had been able to get it, like from the beginning, we could have done so much together in those 2 years, like to really like, shake things up. And I'm okay with that too, because it's my process. I wasn't ready to hear things until I was ready to hear things. And I know she forgives me for that too, but it made life tough for both of us. And I just really thought she was being co-opted and manipulated by conservative right-wing people in our state.
Who want to kill you.
Who don't want me to exist at all, and I was like, she's being brainwashed. I feel like she's in a cult. And what's so funny is now everybody's like the trans activist cult. It's one cult or another, right? And so for me, I'm pretty much like in the middle, right? I try to stay in the middle, stay in my lane. But I remember that conversation so clearly. Like when he was saying that on your podcast, I was recalling those moments of like, I can't believe you just called me that. Well, she's like, you are a biological female. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't care what you say, and she's very much about like, she could only frame it in the way that she understands and how she communicates. So she was always like, you have to look at the scientific evidence. And I'm like, I don't give a shit about the evidence. That's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about, how does this make me feel, and so.
That's not a womanly thing to do.
That's what I'm telling you. At 31 years as a woman does not make me a man when I take testosterone, because I've been conditioned and have lived my life as such for so long. There's no way, like dealing with that rage. I don't know. As a kid, were you told how to handle your feelings and your emotions, from the men in your life? I don't know. I don't know what secret lives men have, You know what I'm saying? Like
But why was it clinging to the rejection of biological womanhood? Like, why was that the thing? Why was that thing that?
Because it made like it was one of the things, right? So it was very much of like, I was like, oh, you don't like trans, you don't like trans people in bathrooms too, like what do you, like? So I really bought the gender affirming model. I really was. I didn't think any other way was possible, and there also isn't a lot of room in that community to say something that's, oppositional in any kind of way without having like a social consequence. And so I, never bucked the system in that respect. And then here's my partner and my spouse, really like burning it down to the ground, like in the biggest, splashiest way possible. And I just stuck my head in the sand and took care of our kids. And that is what I focused on. Meanwhile, 2 feet away from me at the desk at the library is Jamie's picture on the front page. And I'm like, somebody came to my library who knew, who was really upset about it and talked to me, and it became like a borderline threatening conversation, and it scared the hell out of me. So I had reporters calling me, like it was really scary in the beginning for me. And I did feel my identity threatened in those moments. And so like when we started the process of separating, I was surprised. Just my role, and I was surprised that it was finally happening. I was not surprised it was happening because we've been on this road for 4 years or so, maybe a little longer. But we've always like put our kids first kind of thing. And I remember telling her like, well, if I would have met you halfway and been open to this information, and you would have met me halfway about how I felt about it all, maybe we could have like overcome some of this, but we didn't do that. And there's no upsetness to be had about that. So I actually did start listening to conversations and like reading the cast review and like looking at some of these things that I was so unwilling to look at before. And what I found was listening to Ben Ryan's podcast on your show, and also like listening to some other podcasts, like the one with Stella O'Malley, Gender
Waterlands, and such.
Yeah, I thought, I really liked some of what some of their programs and their podcasts. I'm not a podcast person, so like that's not my preferred genre. But how dare I come on a podcast and say that? But anyway,
it's not for everybody.
But what was great about it was I started reading the cast review, and although I'm still not finished because it's so long, what I found is like it's measured writing. There's nothing political in it to me. I have a degree in library information science. I have a degree in fine art. I've read plenty of art theory, plenty of gender theory. I read Judith Butler. I'm super into that. I read Jack Halberstam. Female Masculinity was a book that I was like making a lot of art about. I've made a lot of art about being trans and things like that. And I know what I'm looking at if I'm looking at something that's like about this dialogue or that is bias, and as a librarian, I'm trained to be as objective as possible, even though that's not 100% possible. Right. And so reading the cast review, I was like, there's nothing that they're saying in here that is offensive to me. There is nothing that they're saying. It's in the climate that we're in, the extreme points of view on either side make it difficult to treat these kids. And it makes it difficult to come up with a protocol that's actually based on, ethical science and evidence-based medicine. And that's when I was like, holy shit, like, oh, okay. And I was notes. I've been keeping a journal, this whole time. Things I did a lot growing up that I kind of let fall to the wayside because I have kids, but the reading and the really like opening my mind and like being available to hear those things and to actually, and that's part of why I just didn't look at the information at all, because I knew if I started reading some of this stuff that I was going to understand that a lot of it is not intended to hurt people. It's more looking out for kids and looking out for people who may transition and wanting the first line of defense to be therapy and to be healing for people and not like, it's interesting. Like the solution in this for being trans is like to take away body parts or to add body parts. You know what I mean? Like that's just so it's a psychological thing. It's an emotional state of being. I mean, all the art I ever made about being trans never had to do with my physical appearance. It was like minimal, like emotional landscapes is what I kind of thought of them as that were really like citing popular culture and masculinity and like how we think of men and like stuff like that. And like, it was never about like my transition physically. It was always about this emotional landscape. And so to me, I can strongly relate to that, to needing like that therapy to be the first line of defense, or like looking at something saying like, if you don't give kids puberty blockers, they're most likely to just be gay when they grow up or to be more comfortable in their bodies. Like, oh my God, like what a revelation that was for me. When Ben Ryan was saying like, why are you saying you're biologically the other sex if you have to take cross-sex hormones? Like that's the most simplistic way to put that, but it was something that I was ready to hear in that moment, and it was amazing for me.
Yeah.
Really, really open, change. Like something just clicked in that moment for me in a way that I could not hear before.
If you, I guess, thankfully you're 44.
Right.
And, I don't know to what degree you're a woman that you dislike talking about your age. I know that's a touchy, it can be a touchy topic.
I don't like being middle-aged is one thing I'll tell you, but it's not terrible.
But you're far enough along in your emotional development and your arc as a human being, and you've had enough time on this earth to not be completely devastated by tremendous amounts of change. But it's true, you're going through tremendous amounts of change. You have all these levels of your identity are now being opened up to review, and they're changing right now. Who are you at this point? A parent?
Yeah.
Who's Roxanne? Who is this person?
I'm waiting to find out, Yeah. I'm doing the work, it's really like all the writing. I've, my Twitter, I say Twitter still 'cause I'm old. My X profile, like that's been something that's been pretty liberating for me, because it's like the one place where I'm talking about all these issues. I ended up with like 1,700 followers when I had like 50 before, but the liberating part for me is like the recognition and sort of the reclaiming of like not feeling shame for the abuse that I suffered, and knowing that it wasn't my fault. Like, and I know that sounds weird, but like I posted a picture. I found a picture of myself when I was 14 and a picture of my mom when she was 14. It's in my Twitter feed somewhere. And in the little book that I had since I was a kid, I had those pictures next to each other because we look very similar in the pictures. Like we're posed in the same way. We're looking in the same direction. Our hair is very similar. We have the same nose. And I always thought that was really cool. I didn't know my mom very well. She dropped me off when I was like 2 or 3 and I didn't talk to her until I was like 14 or 15. She smoked crack, was a horrible drug addict, contracted AIDS in the 90s. I have a crazy story. And when I looked at these pictures for Twitter, I realized, oh my God, the person behind the camera is my grandfather. This is the person that abused my mom to the point that she ran away from home. This is the person that abused my mother, who shared a room with my uncle, who then abused me. My grandfather tried to abuse me, and did actually at one point. And he once, a couple times in different ways. And so when I saw those two pictures and looked at that, and because I know my art history, my photo history and things like that, the gaze is kind of an important thing. And I posted that and I said, I didn't connect for me that the person behind the camera was the same sick pedophile in 20 years apart, posing us in the exact same way, looking in the same direction. I remember being uncomfortable taking those pictures. Like there's more that, it was like a little group of pictures or whatever. And like looking at my childhood pictures, like in this photo album, and there's like a couple that are like, they're not pornographic, but they're borderline, like they're just borderline inappropriate enough. And like a picture of me in my first training bra, a picture of me at the beach with my legs open, and like being able to recognize, like, I know who is behind the camera, and that's bullshit. And not feeling shame about it, but more feeling the power of like making that connection and understanding that it was not me, understanding that that was his BS, that was his sickness. Yeah. And basically had my family tumble like a house of cards,
I guess the subconscious framing of abuse as the victim's fault seems like a coping mechanism. So you get power over you get kind of power over that situation. It's like, well, I did that. So I let you, so you can own it, because otherwise,
Right.
like, you're just an object and you're just reduced. You don't have any say in the matter. That's just another thing that you're having to face. It's all coming up. And so so being a trans man, not being a biological female is also a way of saying, yeah, I control this. I control my,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
my womanness,
100%.
my victimhood. Because you do tie, and a lot of the little things that you've said, like, you're hyper aware of danger. Like, am I safe? 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 And
I did that in every single relationship I ever had.
yeah,
With friends, with lovers, with my wife. And what I realized, like, in the last few months is, like, as a trans person, I locked my femaleness away. I suppressed it to the point that did not exist. It was invisible. Those feelings were gone. All that was just obliterated. And then I was safe, sort of, not really. Right. Because all that stuff is still there. All that fight or flight is still there. All those trauma responses are still there. But not understanding enough to recognize that. So that's part of why I've gone public is, to kind of like share that story and to hopefully help other people and to be like, it's okay if you're not trans, and honestly, like, I'm kind of in the middle of the road as far as like other adult trans people. I'm kind of like, I don't ever want to tell anybody how to live, kind of thing. So I just kind of refrain from that commentary, if I can. But at the end of the day, like, no, I don't think every trans person was abused like I was, but I didn't realize how much they were, like how prevalent that was until recently.
Yeah.
As far as I know. But I had not known that until a few months ago. It makes sense to me.
Well, when you got off of recreational drugs, you had 12-step. Now that you're off of, now you're coming off of these other sets of drugs, like what support group is there for you? Or
my family,
Yeah.
My in-laws are really great people. My colleagues at work, I've been at the library for the last 11 years, so I've made some good, strong friendships there. I've got strong, close friends in St. Louis. I'm very close with my ex-girlfriend, Natalie. She's like my best friend, and I count her as family. So we talk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I have people that I can depend on and that are there for me. And it's crazy because I really thought when that Free Press story came out, I was terrified. And it's been, for the most part, with one or two like shitty responses here and there, but for the most part, everybody has been overwhelmingly like supportive. I had emails from people at work, texts from people at work, people calling me I hadn't talked to in years,
Mm-hmm.
Hey, how are you? How are you doing? Like, I just want to check in with you. I've had like a cousin in North Carolina has been reaching out to me the last couple of weeks, like that. Those are like really great things for me, knowing that I have some family there that I wasn't able to depend on before. Really, people at work just saying like, how do you want me to address you? Are you okay? Like, we know you're going through this. My staff just because I work in a small neighborhood library. So there's like 6 of us that work together, 4 or 5 of us. And, they're wonderful. They do a great job, but they also they're like, oh, you want to be called Tiger? That's cool. And I'm very much of like, the customers are going to perceive me as male for probably a long time. So I'm not been out of shape by any of that, so it's just a matter of like, I was like, you can still call me Tiger. I don't really care about pronouns. Like, I just think who cares,
Yeah.
Because there will be a time, hopefully, that will shift and change,
What were the positive and negative side effects of testosterone? I guess you got to just be a wild child and got a break from the female fluidity of your emotions, but you said there's health complications. And I don't want to, you don't have to get too personal, but I just want to broadcast the information because this is a controlled substance for a reason.
Oh, and so rage, anger, not feeling in control of my emotions is a big thing. When that anger comes, it's very hard for me to just walk away or be quiet. And I was probably an angry person before T. But then also like increased risk of stroke, heart disease. I was pre-diabetic for like 5 years, and now I have type 2 diabetes. I have potential kidney issues, so that's something new I'm taking medication for. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high red blood cell count. A lot of different things where like potential liver issues. I don't drink hardly at all for a lot of different reasons, but so that I don't mess my liver up even more. I take 4 or 5 pills. I'm losing all my hair.
Mm-hmm. And when you got on birth control, that's progesterone. I can't remember all the science.
I'm taking
but it does, it reignites your female biology.
I would think so. I don't know the ins and outs of all that. But basically what it'll do is they come in a set where you're supposed to take like the placebo for a week, so you still have a menstrual cycle. I'm just taking them all the way through without taking that. And so like, I won't ever get a menstrual cycle. So that's basically what that's going to do for me. But emotionally, yeah, it's totally changing the landscape. So I know there's going to be a period of emotional adjustment.
Has it already started to affect your art?
I have not made a ton of art.
Yeah. But you are writing. Yeah.
A lot of writing, a lot of journal keeping, a lot of reading material. So I'm reading the Hannah Barnes book, Time to Think, right now. Again, like a book that I never would have picked up before, that is just reads like pure investigative journalism to me. It doesn't have any it doesn't seem like it has an agenda. And so that's refreshing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoops, sorry. Got, cat's needing to.
I've got a cat on my desk sleeping next to me. So no worries.
So I guess, you announce yourself, you're doing a bunch of shows. What does it look, what's the shape of your life now going forward? I guess what's kind of like the message right now that is prominent in your mind to share?
What a question. What I've told some of my more skeptical friends is I will never have this kind of a platform again to speak out about what it is to be trans, what that's been like, what my feelings about pediatric gender medicine are. The fact that I don't think kids should be medicalized. I don't think gender nonconforming kids should be put on this pipeline to be trans. They're even like working in children's libraries and like knowing the children's literature that's coming out. Like there are a lot of books now that talk about, especially like young, boys that are, very feminine. It's very much like he wants to be a girl and I'm like that. So what? Like I would much rather have like William Has a Doll from Free to Be You and Me, there was a song called William Wants a Doll or something like that. And like, it's okay. Like I would much rather have that type of messaging than like, oh, Julian wants to be a mermaid, so we want him to be a girl, or he wants to be a girl. Like that wrong body transition, I just don't. It's
pernicious, man. I saw a book in a library at the old school I used to work at. I mean, a couple years ago, and it just had, it was a bunch of activist stuff. And then you have Jazz Jennings as a cartoon talking about the freedom to be their self. And then you look at what the doctors and their parents have done to that poor creature, just destroyed the life. But they're being sung the praises of as this model of ultimate liberation. It's so stark, and it kind of makes me angry.
Makes a lot of people angry, and being a librarian in the mix is interesting because it's really, for me, it's like intellectual freedom issues, right? And there's all kinds of challenges left and right. And so for me, I'm like, when I'm at work, I'm very every book has the right to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every
'Cause it
propaganda
does.
has its spot.
It does. It does. But I will say, I will never have this platform again. And I've
Yeah.
told my friends that, like, and I think it's important to talk about, because I know there's other people like me out there that just, think they're supposed to believe that they're okay, like that being trans is okay, or that you have to do these things in order to be successful at transitioning or whatever. Like, I wish I had just tried to transition without changing my body, like um,
Hmm.
there are things that may never go, like my voice will always be like this. I love to sing. I used to be a soprano. Like, I still enjoy singing now. It's just different. Um,
Hmm.
but my main thing is, like, I want to help people. And so that's part of, like, how I want to continue to work with Jamie, and things that we're talking about now is, like, ways to help detransitioners, so if
Yeah.
that's through my art or through teaching people how to make art or things like that, it's kind of like what I'm looking at on the horizon. And also just like being there for my kids, that's been probably the most rewarding thing in the last, like, 10 years of my life, was having my older sons come into my life and teach me all about what it is to be a parent and build those relationships, and then to foster these kids. I was a foster kid for a very short amount of time. The system here in our country is broken, and to be able to have the privilege to foster and adopt these kids has been the biggest blessing of my life ever. Really, really, and they love me unconditionally, so I know I'm going to be okay. So being able to be there for them, being able to support them, and then the message to people that are following me on Twitter or people that are paying attention, it's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to try something different. It's okay to detransition, and it doesn't have to be like this dramatic thing. I mean, there's plenty of people that detransition and just don't do what I'm doing right now. And I may not be super
Yeah.
public for a long amount of time. I don't know, but I felt like it was important now to support Jamie because I didn't before,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and to really tell people why, and why I do now,
Mm-hmm.
because being closed-minded, you can be closed-minded and be a leftist, and you can be closed-minded and be a right, conservative person, or you can, kind of open your mind and meet people in the middle. I really think that's a huge problem in our country today anyway, is
Mm-hmm.
everybody believing whatever it is they want to believe. In this situation, the evidence that I have seen, they don't have studies for adults or for kids that proves that medicalizing your transition is beneficial, or that somebody's going to kill themselves, or any of those. So that's the reality. The truth of this is, I can feel however I want about any of this stuff politically, but at the end of the day, like, when I ask my endocrinologist, like, when can I get off this? What are the effects of long-term use of testosterone? And she has no answer for me because there are no studies. Why am I on the drug? Why are you still giving this to me? Why am I still taking it? Right. And the same thing is, if I'm in that position as a 44-year-old person, how can a parent who doesn't know which end is up because they're scared to death for their kid, how do they, and their kid has all these other problems and they've tried to kill themselves before, whatever it is that they're doing, and they're at their wits' end, and they don't know that they don't have to say yes to hormones or, blockers or whatever. And they've never read the cast review, or they don't know, like, that's what I want to be, is like, the facts are the facts. The science is the science. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you disagree with that, fine, but, like, you're being willfully ignorant, just like I was.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I've noticed in interviewing detransitioners over a period of the last few years, I think it's like 5 or 6 years now. One thing that is absolutely essential for their recovery is having something other than themselves to think about and to care about. And you have that with the family, and you are kind of older, so you know that you're not the center of the universe as much.
Exactly.
So you can afford to break down, because we as we age, we understand that our identity is going to go through these cycles of being strong and then collapsing and being rebuilding. But if we're being a good person and we're serving the people that we're responsible for, we have that anchor
those kids keep me in the here and now far more than any type of meditation ever could. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I pick them up, it's about them. It's about their immediate needs, whatever they're doing. It's about spending time with them in whatever way that is. And it is, I feel like I've grown so much just being able to recognize that and to have that, because whatever I'm feeling is replaced by the joy when my son Kendrick is laughing at a joke or making a fart noise or whatever we're doing, you know,
Yeah.
or you know, watching them play on the playground or pushing them on a swing, you know, like it's simple, ordinary things that take me out of myself, you know.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's
Well, Roxy, thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you about such personal matters. And I feel like we can't really have the conversation. It's part of the conversation because you're going through a period of transition, right? So I'll need to have you back on in a year if you're still being public, just to see
for
how
sure.
things have developed for you. There's just so many, there's so many tiers to your story. And it's so present in you. It's working itself out in you so fully right
I'll
now.
tell you this. There was one of my favorite people that attended my. I have a book club at my library. It's called Novel Neighbors. Lots of older folks go there, and she passed away recently. So she's my favorite book club person, and she was kind of a wonderful lady. She's in her 80s, and she met my son Anthony, and I had to bring him to book club one time, and she was like, "You have all these kids and all this thing." She didn't even know I was trans, and she was like, "You have to write a book. You just have to. You have to write a book. You have to do this." And so like, you know, I've been considering like doing more writing, you know, adding more things to Substack or something like that, because I think that's going to be like a really viable place for me to kind of talk about however many levels my life has
Yeah,
been.
no, absolutely. I don't, it's really difficult to get into this topic, but sexual trauma, childhood sexual trauma is a very complex, it has very huge impacts on that. And I think, like you said, it's not a part of the trans discussion, but it's probably lurking in it a lot, not
Oh,
just
for
like
sure.
just not just normal misogyny or unacceptance of gender critical gender nonconforming people, but it's just like there's this human aspect, there's trauma, there's brokenness, and human beings are really weird. We try to fix ourselves by breaking ourselves again, you know.
Right.
By destroying
Yeah,
ourselves,
exactly.
we seek redemption, you know. And there's that dynamic going on with these deconstructive surgeries and this body modification stuff, trying to change myself to fix myself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's about like discussing these things, but then also still not being a victim. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
not having that victim mentality about it. It's more of like I put in my Twitter handle now, it's like, or my bio, like I'm reclaiming my life, you know, reclaiming myself
hmm
through this
hmm
process. And it really, so far, that has been what I've gotten out of it. Like I immensely enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you
yeah.
for having
Thank
me
you.
on.
So where can people find you? Plug your Substack. I'll link it down there in the description, and your
Oh
X.
gosh. Yes, yeah, and my X is the best way. And if you want to look at my art, it's tigerreed.weebly.com.
Weedly?
Weebly.
Weebly, okay. And I'll link all your stuff down there. And I'll
Thanks
end the
very much.
recording. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.
God bless. Here, let me go like that. Cool. Thank you.